who are the architects who are championing this through the work that they do? And what are the new paradigms that are being put out there by the design community that kind of paint a picture of sustainability or the future?
And I'm going to try and reorient the question because I want to talk about the future in that sense. And the future of Australian design is actually way back in the past. And Australia is only just starting to discover Indigenous design. We've known about Indigenous art for a long time, and many people will say that the only true Australian art is Indigenous art. And what's been interesting about that is the journey from the dot paintings and so on, of the desert paintings and the Pinchinjara paintings, to very, very interesting modernist Indigenous painters. Emily Kane Nangwari and Sally Gabori. These are artists who don't paint in that traditional style, but infuse new paintings with ideas that come from their indigeneity but are meeting the current world. Now, the same thing's just starting to happen in design. And when you ask me the architects who are making that change, I'm going to say the couple of people who are making a big change in that regard. One of them is a guy called Paul Memmott, who has published a book which took him 40 years of research to do. It's called Gunya, Gundi and Worley. A Gunya, a Gundi and a Worley are different names for much the same thing, which is a wheelchair. It's a small encampment, a small protective way of having Indigenous camps. The book is fascinating because it actually talks about an Aboriginal architecture that we've ignored for so long. Well, we never knew about it. And together with work that's been done about how the Indigenous community, when we first came 230 years ago, were not just hunters and gatherers. There was an agrarian society and so on. And there's a book called The Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe that's changed minds about the community aspects of indigeneity. And then Gunya, Gundi and Worley actually shows that the way in which the Indigenous looked at Australia is much the same way as the fundamentals of architecture. And Paul Memmott talks about 3 different ways in which things are done. That it is about providing shade, and he has all these different ways in which shade structures. And this idea of the Aussie hat, the big broad-brimmed hat, is translated now. It used to be verandas, and now we're going even further beyond that to this idea of shade of outdoor space. Not shade of indoor, but shade of outdoor. Wind protection. So you actually had a wind barrier that would stop the wind coming in. And then the third part of it was warmth. And you would create some way in which a very small space was just enough for you, and you might have a couple of dogs in there as well to keep you warm, which, by the way, is where the expression 3-dog night, that's the coldest night. You need 3 dogs to keep you warm. But what it's done is it's brought to the fore that there is an Indigenous knowledge. So the architect that's built on that, who's most well known and I think is doing the most interesting things, is in the State Government Architecture Office in Sydney. It's a man by the name of Dylan Combamerry, who is working on both buildings for the Indigenous community, trying to reflect back on those things, but also, I think more importantly, trying to bring an understanding of indigeneity to the white fella in what we are doing. And I find that the most interesting thing that's happening in sustainability is if you had a culture that lasted for 60,000 years, and it created this great art and it created this longevity and so on. Maybe we should take another look at all of that. So that's my first answer to that. I think there are a couple of firms that you can find out about them because there is enough information about them. Whereas some of the ones that I really treasure are so far below the radar line, they don't even have a website. They're so far embedded into the community. And that's Hully Liveris in Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Thalis at Hill Thalis has won a number of key urban design awards, or competitions rather, which haven't gone ahead. But you can see in the urbanity of what he is doing, he's trying to pull the past into the future by looking at, for instance, in a project in Sydney to extend the CBD, he was proposing to extend the streets and the street pattern and the street life, the kind of crooked streets of Sydney and so on, into a new area where you could subdivide it off and a variety of different buildings would be built. In the end, that didn't happen, and it's been turned into a kind of Rockefeller Center, a kind of one ownership mall. It's good as far as that goes, but we're missing the idea of what we had as a community, as a CBD community. And I think in Melbourne, there is a movement, really interesting movement, which has been called the Nightingale movement, which is to relook at how apartments are done on a co-op basis. Jeremy McLeod of Breathe Architecture was one of the initiators of that, and 6 Degrees, which pretty much tells you about the nature of the firm, but 6 Degrees have taken that on, and Andrew Maynard as well. So there's a group of architects. That's an interesting thing, that there's a very big support mechanism amongst that group of Melbourne architects looking to work on social aspects of architecture at the same time as the environmental work that they're doing.